Well, this is kind of unexpected for me. I don't have anything planned to say, but I was with a group, I think about 15 people that went down to a Presbyterian meeting and told them we'd like to start a church in Johnston, which was a little different, I think, because normally Presbyterian thinks, well, this would be a good place to establish a church, and then they go about doing it. And if I remember right, Grant Voorhees was our spokesman down there, and he and his wife were very active in getting the church started. And when we first started, we didn't have a building or anything, so we had Sunday school in homes around here close by, and our church service was held in the Lions Club, which was an old building that has since been torn down and the new one built. It was a bit crowded, but it was fun. And Jean can tell you how crowded it was in the Sunday school class she had.
Okay. I started out with teaching 3- and 4-year-olds right from the beginning. I was asked to teach the littlest ones. So I first taught class in Bob and Joyce Arley's basement, which is across the street from the Lions Club. The adult class met in Margaret Voorhees' house, just to the north of them, before we had anything done at the Lions Club. So I taught in the basement, and I had 3- and 4-year-olds, angels, all of them, good kids. And then we moved to they made a room in the old Lions Club downstairs in the basement for the little kids' classroom. And they kind of built it around the furnace room, and it was not so deep, and kind of grubby. So it wasn't quite as much fun as the basement of Joyce Arley's house. And that's where I started, and I stayed teaching Sunday school for probably 10 years before I got out of it. I was teaching all the time. And I think that's mainly what I was doing, because I had 2 little kids. Jim worked nights, and so I didn't get too involved except in teaching Sunday school in those first years.
Early in, when we were forming the church, we met at the home of Bret and Margaret Voorhees, who were very instrumental in starting this church. And we were trying to decide on a name for the church, and they were down to between Trinity or St. Paul. Well, we were kind of tied in our vote. And I believe it was the Becks. Margaret and Jason came in a little bit late, and they voted for St. Paul. So that's how we got our name.
Get the money for that. When we first started construction of the church, it was quite a problem to try and find $110,000 at that time. And one of the things that, along being with chairman of the building committee, I was co-chairman of the finance committee. And the thing that bothered me so much at that particular time was that all the churches that the Presbyterian had built and had given grants to, you first had to build the fellowship hall and then the sanctuary. Well, I hated to have my children grow up in a fellowship hall sitting on a folding chair all through their early Christian life, church life. And so I wanted to build a sanctuary and use that as a fellowship hall. And it seemed to be the same with the rest of the congregation. So I happened to be in New York in the summer of, I think it was around 1960, and was talking to the clerk of the National Assembly. And we were working them for a grant of about $20,000. And he insisted that we had to build the fellowship hall. And so I had about a 2-hour discussion with him about the fact that we were building it for our children, and most of the children were age of mine, preschool, and just into elementary. And if we built a fellowship hall, they'd never have the opportunity of going to church in a sanctuary until they left home. And so I used that argument with him, and finally he said, well, he'd think about it. And a few weeks after I left there, why, he called and said that we could get $20,000 grant, and we could build a fellowship hall first.
Oh, sanctuary.
Or, what?
Sanctuary.
Sanctuary first, yes. And sorry. And so now we had the problem of working on the local presbytery to get their $10,000 grant, and for them to agree with the same thing. Well, when they found out that the national had, why, they went along with us, and so we got our sanctuary. And so about 2 years after that, it was either 62 or 63, that the National Assembly was held here in Des Moines, and they had the barn, Veterans Auditorium, rented for that. And I happened to be the first layman on the program at that assembly, and I presented the clerk of General Assembly with a gavel to use to preside over the General Assembly meeting here that was made out of one of the oak pieces from the sanctuary. So the gavel they used in that assembly was from our church. And so we got our sanctuary, and $30,000, I think it was, between the two presbyteries.
First pastor was Wade Anderson, fresh out of seminary, with a wife and a new baby. And I was his secretary to start with. I worked, in fact, in the church office for years, for free, of course. But he didn't last too long, maybe less than a year. And then he left being a pastor completely. He got into doing finance work with banks and stuff. We always figured we drove him out of the business.
Well, the church, when it first started, did a lot of volunteering.
Oh, sure.
We didn't have anybody who was on salary other than the pastor. And so everything else was done with volunteer work, mowing the lawn and
Everything.
keeping the church clean and all that sort of thing. And I don't know, there always seemed to be somebody there that was willing to do the things that needed to be done.
Then we were having a discussion early on as to whether we could afford pews, or we'd have to have folding chairs. So we had a meeting one time after church, and we took a vote, and we voted to buy the pews. And one of our members said, those of us who couldn't afford it voted for it, and the other people voted against, but we managed to get pews. So when we opened the sanctuary, we had pews to sit in.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday.